Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Katrina, and I work in the Faculty of STEM at the Open University. I sit on the team who bring you these Ask the Expert series. Today's event is the last one for summer, and we have brought you a very exciting one, a day in the life of a digital detective. Today's expert is Dr. Jan Collie. She is a lecturer here in cybersecurity. Her teaching and research both focus on digital forensics and cybersecurity. We definitely have best of the best expert for you. She's got over 18 years of industry experience. And prior to the OU, she ran her own digital forensics and cybersecurity consultancy firm. And she's even been called to give evidence to committees in both the House of Lords and the House of Commons. I'll now hand over to Jan to give you a small peek into this thrilling area of work.
Hi, everybody. Just give me a second whilst I share my screen and get the slides up. Where is it? Why isn't it? Okay, is that view okay? Please confirm.
Yes, all good.
Wonderful. Well, as you heard, my name is Jan Collie, and I'm a lecturer in cybersecurity at the Open University. As you just heard, that's where when I'm wearing that funny academic hat that you can see me wearing just there. But otherwise, I'm wearing my virtual fedora, which is my detective's hat, my digital detective's hat, because I'm a digital forensic specialist and I often act as an expert witness in criminal and civil cases. And I'll be talking about that during this particular presentation. So, oh, heavens, my mouse has gone stupid. Let's go through that again. Sorry, folks. There's always the unscripted bits are the best. Anyway, so we're going to talk about what digital forensic is and what does a digital forensic specialist do. That is the subject of what I'm here to talk about today, when I'm trying to give you an overview into what a day in the life of a digital detective can look like. So on a day-to-day basis, the digital forensic specialist can expect to deal with a lot of dark deeds. You'll see some popping up on your screen now. Some of which, you know, there's lots more dark deeds than this, but here's just an elegant smattering. All of these I've actually had to cover during my 20-year career, and sometimes more than once, obviously. Now, you probably noticed that a lot of the things mentioned here involve the sort of crime that frequently features in films and TV series. Some of them, like burglary, for instance, might surprise you. But of course, the fact is that practically every crime these days involves digital evidence, mainly because people are walking around with digital equipment, in this case, mobile phones, in their pockets. So, I mean, recent statistics show that in the UK alone, 99% of 16 to 24-year-olds have a phone, and 98% of 25 to 34-year-olds, and 96% of 35 to 54-year-olds. So, and even 54 to 64-year-olds have 83% of them have phones. By comparison, only 18% of people over 65 have mobile phones. So I don't think they're probably, unless they're the gangster granny, you know, I don't think they're probably going to be breaking into your house. But it's astonishing, isn't it? It shows you how much absorption is out there with mobile phones. Oh, incidentally, just to frighten you a bit, there are 34 burglaries an hour in the UK. That's 817 a day. So yeah, be very afraid. Obviously, as you can see from this list, the types of cases that come through the door of the digital detective tend to fall into two categories. The first one is criminal and the second one is civil. On criminal cases, this means that the forensic specialists will often find themselves in court. Here are a few courts that you might find yourself in. Now, that one there, the High Court, you'll have all heard of the Old Bailey, I don't doubt. And that is actually the highest Crown Court. There's High Court's very serious matters indeed, very, very serious. So murders and things of that nature. Oddly enough, they also deal with family matters, and that would be disputes involving parents and children. So divorces, separation, and child custody, or where a local authority takes children or a child into care. You might also end up in a civil court, and here's a few being listed here. Quite often, civil law obviously will apply to companies. So where you have businesses that have a problem, 9 out of 10, there's usually an internal inquiry before they decide to go to court with anything. So perhaps if suspicion has fallen on an employee or more than one employee for whatever reason, there's probably be an internal inquiry first. And if they think it's more serious than that, you might find yourself in industrial tribunal, for instance, or you might find yourself in a portion of the High Court that deals specifically, for instance, the Commercial Court or Technology and Construction Court, that deals with rather more meaty issues. But the fact is that litigation is so unbelievably expensive that most companies will try, or most civil matters are concluded before it gets to court, because it just costs stupid thousands of pounds to do. Other places that you might end up, here's one that was a surprise to me, would be a coroner's court. That's only ever happened to me once, and it came as a great surprise. Again, this was down to the fact that somebody, unfortunately, somebody who was found dead, had a mobile phone on them. Now, this particular person was a missing person, and they were known to be severely depressed and probably in danger. And so the hunt was on to try and find this poor person. Unfortunately, they couldn't locate him. And by the time the police found him, he'd already taken his own life. And that was, so there was a big inquiry as to, mainly to do with, coroner wanted to know why the police didn't locate him earlier. And it was all to do with where he was actually located. We'll come on to this, and there's a picture in the next couple of slides that shows the masts that your mobile phone is in connection with as you're walking around or as you're moving around. Those big masts you see on the top of buildings, or maybe in a farmer's field, or perhaps even on the front of a shopping centre. And every time you walk around, your phone's sending a little signal to those things, and that's how you can be traced, or at least your path can be traced. Usually it's traced after the event, but in the case of a missing person such as this, the police do have powers to ask the service provider, so that's the person, that is the company that provides your services to your mobile phone, to give details of the actual whereabouts. It perhaps won't be in absolute real time, but it will be fairly close to real time. That's hard and it's difficult. Anyway, so that's what that one's about. And other two places that I ended up that I wasn't expecting to get to was House of Commons and House of Lords. Now, this wasn't actually in the actual chamber of either the Commons or the Lords, but both the Commons and the Lords have committees. They hold committees to make inquiries into various issues of importance. Now, for instance, I was called into an inquiry by the House of Commons into the disclosure of evidence in criminal cases. And that's just because I'm well known for doing a lot of criminal cases, and I have quite strong views about how digital evidence is collected and handled and analysed in those cases. Also, I was called twice to an inquiry by the House of Lords into forensic science in general. So that's really to do with the overall forensic science. So that would include, there were also witnesses, experts who deal with DNA forensics. Sorry, my dog keeps coming in and out, so it keeps opening the door. So this is what happens when you do live presentations. Anyway, so that picture, incidentally, that I've put there, I put that there because I happened to snap that particular picture. It's actually a mural that's at the foot of the stairs that takes you up to the committee rooms. This is in the Palace of Westminster. So you don't actually go into the chambers, as I already said, but there are lots and lots of committee rooms up there. and you have to go up a staircase and down various corridors. And that particular picture is located at the foot of one of the stairways. As you can see, it's a picture of Elizabeth I. That was quite nice and quite decorative. A little bit different than putting up the usual picture of the Palace of Westminster from the outside. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what the digital forensics looks like when you're actually doing it. It consists of some basic stages. The first is you've got to identify the evidence. That is, what is the evidence? Where is the evidence? More to the point. Once you've identified what it is and where it is, and you hope that you've identified all of it, but you might not have, you identify what you can, then you preserve it. That is to say, you try and keep it as forensically sound as possible, so you don't want anything to change it. If you've got computers, for instance, you certainly don't want people going up and moving the mouse around and going clicky, clicky, snoopy, snoopy, snoop, because that will tread all over the information and the potential evidence for the digital forensic expert. So if anything goes wrong or there's any suspicion about the use of a computer, it should be absolutely left alone and not touched by anybody until the digital forensic person gets there. Then there's the recovery of the said data. The picture you can see on your screen there is a funny thing. It's a forensic machine that both acts as something called a write blocker. That is to say, you can actually pull in data from, say, a hard disk onto another piece of media, usually another hard disk. You make a copy, you make a forensically sound copy, and it's sound because this particular machine sits in the middle and it blocks any kind of information transfer from the suspect disk to the machine and to the receiving disk, which is going to receive the evidence. Incidentally, when you come to analyze the evidence, it's the copy that you're going to analyze. You never, ever, ever, ever carry out an examination on an original piece of equipment, such as a hard disk. You always make a forensic copy. The same is true of mobile phones. You have to download all the data and you go through the copy, not the actual thing. And that's all to do with keeping the data as pristine as you possibly can, so that there's no question about what might have happened to it. If I can draw an analogy, for instance, in DNA forensics, and you'll all know this because you've seen enough detective series to know that if there's a body on the library floor and there's a gun lying nearby and there's a pool of blood and that type of thing, we all know, because we've seen enough detective series to know that you don't go along and move the gun or move the body or step in the blood and things like that. Well, the same is true of digital evidence. You do not want to interfere with it. It's very volatile and it's very easily changed, very easily corrupted. So you try and keep it as preserved and as pristine as possible. And then we get to the present stage. Now, generally speaking, as I've already said, that would be in a court of law. But quite often on civil cases, that would be in a report for the people who've employed you to do the analysis, to do the examination and analysis. All right, now this is to do with knowing where the data is. Well, of course, as you all know, information is absolutely everywhere today. Here's a few examples of where it might be. Some obvious ones, obviously, your tablet, your mobile, your computer, servers all over the world. That picture there, that's a cell site. You'd be familiar with seeing things of that nature, and that's where those signals I was talking about from your mobile phones come in. There's also these guys. People tend to buy wearable tech and they don't think about what's being held, what data is being held by the wearable tech. I must admit I'm the worst person in history. If there's anything new, any new gadget, if I don't take the anti-gadget pills, I'm going to be buying it, wearing it, looking at it, fiddling with it, breaking it, finding out how it works. But all these things have little tiny chips inside them, and that keeps data. Something like a fitness tracker, for instance, might show what your heart rate is. And then these things are already being used. The data from these sorts of devices is already being used in police inquiries, for various things. For instance, in one particular case that I heard of, unfortunately, it was a horrible murder. But they'd found that the lady who was the victim had been wearing a Fitbit or something of that nature, and it had monitored her heart rate, and it actually showed at the time of the attack that her heart rate had shot up. So that helped the police identify who the likely suspect of that crime was, who was actually around that lady at that time, and where she was, and who might have been in the area at the time. So it's quite strange how much stuff, how much information all this tech that we all like so much keeps. And as a digital forensic examiner, you might end up having to look at data coming off one of these. Incidentally, down there on the home tech, you'll see I've put smart kettle. Well, there are smart devices. I actually am so sad. I even have a sewing machine that is internet connected. If I still want it to be, it's only for passing patterns back and forth. But the danger point there is that it's on your Wi-Fi, as things like your smart kettle and your smart fridge, fridge camera, all that stuff. It's on your network. And what you don't know is how securely it's keeping the password for your Wi-Fi network. So if I'm a nasty hacker and I want to crack into your Wi-Fi, I'm going to look for the weakest point. And the weakest point is quite likely to be some little bit of home tech like this, where the password for your particular Wi-Fi network is kept what we call in the clear, i.e. it's not encrypted. It's just my network, or password 01. Please don't use that password. It's terrible. Anyway, there we go. So that's some of the stuff you might, some of the places you might find things. Also, of course, we've got cloud storage, lots and lots of cloud storage. But I'm going to try and move on to the storage that I'm most likely in the field to come across on a day-to-day basis. I'm just looking where I am with this. Here we go. Yeah, so in a regular computer, your desktop computer, if you guys still have one of those, it's most likely to be a hard disk. I'm trying to move this along. Here we go. On something like a laptop, in particular a modern one like this, the information is likely to be on a solid state drive. So there's no moving parts in a solid state drive. The data is all on a chip. And all that data is in noughts and ones, basically, binary. As I was speaking about before, anything that collects data will have some type of memory. That's the interior of a mobile phone when it's been broken and you're looking inside. So that's where the chips come from. And what you've got in there is something called RAM memory and ROM memory, which I won't be looking at here because that kind of memory holds transient data. That's data that's just whizzing around in the ether whilst the device is actually live. Probably you're going to come to that when the device isn't live. So you're going to be wanting to see what's kept in random access memory. Then we've got flash memory. And flash memory is also the sort of memory used on these kinds of things here. That's SD cards, USB sticks, and SIMs, for example. And these devices, this type of memory stores persistent data. So that's stuff that will be hanging around for your friendly neighborhood digital forensic examiner to capture and analyze. Now I'm going to move on from things that you're going to capture and capture the actual data from, and look at when you get the data back to the lab, what it looks like. So we all use particular packages, specialist packages for analysis of forensic data. This is the sort of screen that you're likely to see. I've got an arrow there pointing to a file that's got a little cross next to it. There's quite a few files, I hope you can see that clearly, that's got some crosses next to them. Those are deleted data. So when you pull the data in off, let's say, your hard drive, and you're having a look at it, you can see what's called live data, that is to say data that hasn't been deleted, and data that has been deleted. And this particular package just happens to show you the deleted stuff with a little red cross to it like that. let's delve a little deeper. What's inside, for instance, a photograph? So if I find a photograph, whether it's live or deleted, on a piece of data, like on a device, for instance, a hard disk, usually there'll be something left. It won't all have been destroyed. So if I've got a picture such as this picture, I can look inside it. What's it look like inside? Well, again, it's back to the binary, but by the time you got it into forensic software, the analyst will actually be looking at what's known as hex. So that's the things that this here that says FFD8, FFEO. And then on the right-hand side there, on that screen, you can see something called ASCII, and that's kind of it is a alphanumeric rendering of what's in this hex here. So if there's anything readable, sort of human readable, as you see on the right-hand side there, it's read JFIF, which just shows you that that's a type of picture file. That's a type of picture known as a JPEG, which some of you, I'm sure, will have heard of. And there's a word there called EXIF, and that is a special kind of data. It's metadata. So the classic way of describing data, which really isn't very helpful to the non-specialist, is data about data. Well, thanks for that. But basically, it's really deep internal data that tells you lots and lots more about a file. This is both these things together. So when I'm looking inside this picture file, you see the metadata in there. This is the EXIF data, and I hope you can see that clearly enough to see that inside that picture is lots of interesting information. For one thing, we can see that this picture was taken on an Apple iPhone, a 4S, so it's quite an old iPhone, and you can probably see there's a date in there, and that was taken in 2013, so obviously that's quite a long time ago. But I'm basically just putting this up to show you the sort of information that can be found inside files. There's a lot of it, and it's quite fascinating. With pictures, incidentally, there'll quite often be location data as well. So that is, geolocation will actually put you down to longitude and latitude as to where the picture was taken. And what's inside a text file, for instance? Well, I made this pretend text file, and over on the left-hand side, they can see what I wrote. Inside it is, again, the hex and the ASCII. The only thing the ASCII tells me, because I've just looked at these things lots and lots and lots, is that PK at the top there means that it's a doc, it's a Word document file. And this is what it looks like in the forensic software. This is another type of forensic software. And inside it, you can see that this is a text file. And in the bottom pane there, I hope you can read the exact same thing that was in the original document, which says this is a test document, blah, 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 blah. I'm just finding where I've got to, because I've got a mixture of bits and pieces of paper on here to give myself the little prompts. So what it actually looks like, first of all, let's say you've got a mobile phone that's come into custody, you've got to go to a police station to analyse it. Obviously, for the user, when they're doing their texts on your mobile phone, it looks like this. By the time it gets into the forensic software for phones, it's going to be, you're pulling in the data, it's going to look a little bit like this. So the forensic software will tell the analyst how many call logs there are, how many chats there are, and it even tells you how many things are deleted. Look at that, gets you WhatsApp back, and it'll get a lot of other interchanges from various other apps as well, all the popular ones. The forensic software is so sophisticated that it can actually just grab all that off your mobile phone. And then when you look at it a little bit more closely in the software, you'll actually come up with the messages. Obviously, I've had to blot out, this is actually a real, from a real case, so I've blotted out the names and the numbers, but you can see that the forensic software will tell you when this call was made, what the source was, and who it's to, and what the content of the message was. So you get an awful lot of information about that, that particular text or that particular phone call. Web browsing, that's another one. So we pull in web browsing. Here's an example. Again, it's quite an old example, but it's a good example because you can clearly see that what the forensic software does is it chunks through all the data and it puts it in a nice format like this. So you can actually see in that column with search term, you can actually see the search terms that were entered by the user at the computer keyboard. There's some pretty bad spelling going on with this particular user. Over on the right hand side, I don't know how clearly you can see it, but I hope you can see it clearly enough to see how these terms come out. For instance, on this on row 7, where it says addicting games just with one D, and follow it right the way across to the right hand side, how that goes into the interface is it goes as addicting plus games. And if it was, for instance, somebody's put name of a famous shop, I better not mention that, map of Kent, UK. So no matter how many terms you put in, you know, I don't know, flights to the Algarve in August, whatever actual words you type in at the keyboard, that's how it goes into something like Google or Chrome. For the forensic examiner, it comes back as this word plus that word plus this word plus that word. Yeah, I'm only telling you this because it's important for the another slide. So we can get back exactly what search terms people put in to their browsers, basically. But there's this thing called interpretation, and that's why I went on and on a bit about what's typed in at the keyboard. Again, this is from a real case, and I've sort of tried to cut out some of the more disgusting language in this. But basically, this was used in evidence to show that the person that the police had levelled a charge at had been browsing a lot of nasty images, that's to say pictures, on the internet. And there was all sorts of reasons why what they said was search terms weren't search terms. What the prosecution had put forward as being search terms were actually had been automatically generated. And you could see that because if you can look at the columns across 1, 2, 3, 4, you can see the timings of when things come in. And on the slide, I haven't got the slide in this set, but on the actual search terms, I couldn't put it up because the search terms were just too disgusting. But on the timings, you could see that it was second per second per second per second per second. Well, nobody types that fast for a start. So that was one indication that it had to be machine done rather than human done. The other thing was it was about 3 or 4 different languages, all perfectly spelled and perfect grammar. These were 3 or 4 languages that the suspect didn't even speak, let alone get the grammar and the spelling right. So interpretation's important. I've put this particular slide in, not just because it was easier to clean up, but if you look over onto the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th column there, it says Chrome synced data. So again, this was a matter of interpretation. So the web browsing on that particular mobile phone had been synchronized. So it hadn't been actually done in real time, or this particular web browsing, the one that was the subject of the charge, hadn't been done by the actual user at the time that was being alleged. What had happened is that the data had been synced from some other machine, perhaps a computer or an iPad or whatever, that was on the same account. So as you know, your computers these days, everything's interlinked, and it likes to just spread it across every device that you own. And it does that because it thinks that you want to have all your information wherever you are, which you might want to have all your information wherever you are. And all your web search, you might want to go back to something you were looking at before you left home and before, on the way to work or something like that. But that would be synced data. So in this, I'm only showing you this slide because it was pivotal in showing that the person who was accused actually hadn't done the search terms that they weren't search terms, they hadn't done the search terms that had been alleged. And in any case, whoever did put in any search terms on this particular engine, the search terms that all the web browsing had actually been synchronized across, so you couldn't tell what device it had particularly come from. I've only put this last slide here to reiterate that most likely, or quite often in criminal cases, the expert, that is to say the digital forensic examiner, you're only an expert if you're called to give evidence in court, and at that time you are the court's expert. So it's not actually right to call yourself an expert unless you're actually in court. And if you're called to court, I want to make this clear that if you're called to court to give evidence, you don't belong to whoever's employing you. So if it's a prosecution, you don't belong to them. And if it's a defense, you don't belong to them. You are not anybody's hired gun. You are there to be the court's expert and to give the court direction and advice on your specialist subject that matters within your professional knowledge and expertise. And so it's also your duty to present evidence in an unbiased manner. I have a particular bee in my bonnet about that kind of thing, and I just wanted to put that slide in. Oh, incidentally, this is another one of my pictures. This is actually a mural that is inside the Old Bailey. So that's one of the many, many murals. Quite beautiful inside, not the court, not when you're in the court, but outside the court. It's really quite beautiful, and that's one of the murals inside the building. And that's about it. I hope I haven't kept you too long and blitzed you with too much stuff too quickly. So I'm just going to put that up. And I think now that you're going to have some questions for me, yeah?
Yeah, there's been some great discussion in the chat. First of all, I just want to apologize to folks for the technical issues we've had on Facebook. Hopefully you were able to hop over to YouTube to join us. We will make sure the recording of this event gets up on Facebook for you to enjoy. So to crack on with some of these questions, Will has asked, what are the new challenges with SSD you have experienced? And maybe for those of us not in the lingo now, you could tell us what SSD is.
Well, an SSD is a solid state drive. That's the sort of thing, as I said, that's quite often in a modern. I can't actually get the chat up. Oh, I can't see anything in the chat actually. So this is obviously chat that you're seeing, and I'm not. Well, solid state drives, I mean, without wanting to make everybody's eyes bleed, they work in a different way, so there's no moving parts. So one of the challenges is how you get the data off an SSD because of the way that it's stored, which is very, very different. It's questionable whether you'll get all of it. Quite often you'll get many duplicates and parts of duplicates. The other thing with SSD storage is that if something's been deleted, sometimes it can be, you might get a very little bit of it, or you might get none of it. It might just be completely zeroed out. But the main challenge with SSD is capturing all of it. It's just really hard to know that you've got the entirety of the data on that type of disk. There's a lot of academic papers written about it. If you're really interested to find out more, it's a bit too academic to really go into in a conversation such as this, because people will start probably dropping off to sleep. I mean, there are a lot of I would say worse challenges in digital forensics at the moment. But yeah, capturing all data, if it's an SSD, is a bit of a problem, knowing that you've got it all. There are techniques.
Great. So we've got a question from David, and he did let it slip that he used to be a crime scene investigator. If there were any sources of digital forensic opportunities frequently missed, or are there any sources of digital forensic opportunities frequently missed in police investigations? And what software should we learn to use if we want a career in digital forensics?
Heavens, that's a big one. Well, I'm not a police officer, and I've never been a police officer. So I can't really say what's frequently missed. I think one of the problems, and this is a bit broad brush, so I hope I'm not upsetting anybody by saying this, but this is my experience. My experience has been that the people who go and take pieces of digital equipment from premises where something has occurred, that is to say, perhaps they break into somebody's house and take away the computers. Those people aren't usually the forensic examiners, and they've got particular instructions. They'll know basic things to look for, like grab any computer, grab an iPad. If there's any hard disk lying around, get those. They might even think to, if there's any USB keys, to grab those. But basically, because they're not specialists, there could well be things that are overlooked on the crime scene. And also, you've got to be realistic about it. For instance, if you've got one of those home assistants sitting there, like your Amazon Echo or your Google thing, or your realistically, what you're going to get off one of those. I suppose if I was an officer and I was trying to think of all the places where digital data might be, I'd probably grab that too and bag and tag it and take it back to the station. But how useful it would be at the end of the day, I don't know. But I'm a belt and braces person. What's harder to know is what information isn't actually at the scene but is in cloud services, because so much is now kept in the cloud. Loads and shed loads of stuff is now kept in the cloud. It's getting less and less frequent that we're doing what we call dead box forensics. That is to say, you actually get a proper old-fashioned computer across your desk. It's much more to do with what's in the cloud, what's saved on the cloud, where is it, and can you get it? Can you get it in a forensically sound manner? Probably not. But you will know that there are things called the ACPO guidelines, and you've got to try. If you can't get your information, you can't bring it in a forensically sound way, you've got to at least be able to explain why not and what you did do, so that if the evidence, so the question of the evidence being tainted is a smaller question rather than a really big question that might get your evidence thrown out of court. Now, as to software, well, there are proprietary packages out there. I'm a bit chary of mentioning particular names. This isn't an advert, but there are 3 or 4 that people generally use. Gentleman who's, or if it might be a lady for all I know, who's been in the police, you will know that Ncase is a favourite that's used quite a lot. Something called FTK is another one. If you want to look at a free bit of analysis software, there's Autopsy. That's quite fun to load down and get it for free, and you can have a little bit of a poke around on your own equipment. I hasten to add, don't go trying this, folks, at home on a device that does not belong to you, because you will end up in trouble. So getting to know those types of forensic packages, usually you have to go on specialist courses, which you have to pay quite a lot of money for to go on those courses. But that's what I'd recommend if you're serious about it. That's what you actually need to do.
Thanks, Jan. Trent, he's got a couple of questions, but we'll start with, what's the investigation tactics when it comes to encrypted evidence?
Well, the big problem with encrypted evidence is have you got enough time and computing power on the planet to blitz this? I mean, that's a very, very big, wide and sweeping question, really. It depends on the type of encryption. Some encryption is not that difficult to crack. Other types of encryption is virtually impossible to crack. I mean, for instance, the encryption that's on Apple phones, a lot of the data on mobile phones, particularly Apple phones now, you can get the data down, but it's all gobbledygook, and you can't crack it. There is no way in. It's like the old Blackberries were a bit like that, because they used a particular encryption algorithm that was specific to that particular phone. So without that little bit of pixie dust, as we used to call it, which was, you had the algorithm and then you had the pixie dust that came off the phone. Without those two things, you were never going to decrypt that data. So that, it's not so much, you have tactics in any kind of investigation, including including encryption, is what type of encryption are you looking at? And you have to form your strategy of what you're going to do depending upon what it is you're looking at, and that applies to everything. So your examination or your examination and analysis strategy will depend upon what the case is, what the challenges are. Are we saying we're being hacked here, and are we looking for little bits of packages that might be floating around on our servers that it might look like it shouldn't be there, but is it all encrypted? Can we find out what it is? So it's on a case-by-case basis. There's no one-stop shop for looking at things like encryption. You want to know what it is, how tough it is, what style of encryption it is, and then you've got a better idea of what your chances are of trying to get anything out of it. These days, it's all so sophisticated that I wouldn't be holding my breath too much thinking about decrypting. Perhaps some bigger agencies, you know, national agencies and so forth, with tons and tons of computing power and rather more sophisticated equipment than the average digital forensic bod. You know, it's computing power and lots and lots and lots and lots of sophisticated software, some of which, you know, the person in the lab, such as myself, does not have access to, but obviously national agencies have access to way more sophisticated stuff than we do. And I can't really talk to what they have. I just know they've got it. Yeah.
Great. I love the very technical term of gobbledygook.
Sorry, that's a Janism. I sometimes call it, if people are giving evidence and they get all technical, I call it gobbledygook.
Okay, so Trent goes on to ask, do we need to do a better job towards quantitative evaluation of the results of digital forensics investigations? Any ideas for the future?
That's a very academic question. I mean, it depends on your stance, really. There's a lot of arguments about qualitative and quantitative strategies. I've written stuff about it myself. I mean, I don't really want to put my head over the parapet and say what my personal view is on that, to be honest, because I think it's divisive. Sorry, there's plenty of academic papers written about the shoulds and shouldn'ts of that side of things.
Absolutely. So here is a very good question for the OU. What do I need to study to become a digital investigator?
Well, I'd suggest you start with some kind of computing degree. Essentially, for digital forensics, it's understanding operating systems. Why I say that is because unless you know how the potential evidence has been stored and where within the operating system it's been stored, you're not going to find it very easily. So understanding how computers work, getting to know more about how particular operating systems work, because they're all a bit quirky, and each version of them might do something just slightly different than what they did the last time. So, for instance, you might know where, let's say, browsing history is kept on an old Windows machine. I'm going to say Windows XP for now, but every iteration of Windows after that, it might be in the same place, it might not be in the same place. So some of these things we call artifacts, digital artifacts, those are the bits and pieces that people like me want to go and have a look at. They may be in the same place when you get to Windows 7, or by the time you get to Windows 10, or by the time you get to Windows 11, they might not be. So it's a thing that, yeah, as you're starting out, I would say do a computing degree, probably do some cybersecurity whilst you're at it, because cybersecurity is the big developing area, and digital forensics is quite, in my view, quite a large part of that, and needs to be understood if you're going to be doing cybersecurity. And then after that, I mean, you can do a master's in digital forensics at various places, including the OU, I hasten to add. So that's probably a good type of thing to do. Choose your course carefully. Look at what they're actually going to be covering, and don't forget, with digital forensics, it's changing all the time. So it's a discipline. Why it's so fascinating, I find it so fascinating, is it's never the same. You think you know it, and whoosh, it's out your fingertips. Something changes every time. So you've always got to be questioning all the time. Okay, well, that's what I thought, that's what I know it was last time, but might have missed something because something's happened in the meantime. So it's a discipline in which you need to be learning and keeping yourself up to date the entire time. But that's where I'd sort of recommend starting.
Right. And like you said, the OU does offer undergraduate and postgraduate degrees in computing and IT and cybersecurity. Have to plug that in, don't we?
Yes, we have to plug the team. Yeah,
absolutely. So I'm going to skip a couple of questions, but don't worry, I will come back to those. But Louise has posed a question, and I think it's a very valid question that everybody should ask. So Louise says, it concerns me that if I share a photo on social media, a scammer could find where I live. If metadata is off my phone, could they still find my location on the photo if they dug deep enough?
If they don't what, sorry?
If they dug deep enough.
They might well do. They might well do. That's kind of why I talk about what's inside files when I do a more sort of a general overview like this. There's that much information, particularly in pictures. The amount of information that's in pictures and little videos, and so it's quite shocking. So certain platforms, certain social media platforms, I'm trying to restrain myself from mentioning names. Certain platforms, if you upload a picture from your mobile phone, it'll strip out the location for you. Certain platforms will do that, so that you don't have to worry yourself stupid about maybe location data being inside your photograph. And excuse me, for instance, if you're using a Mac computer, although it'll have the location data in when you're looking in your photos, if you copy that somewhere else, it'll just take the location data out. There are ways of finding out what's inside your photograph. Excuse me, I drank my drink a little bit too quick for something that had fizzy water in it. There are some little free packages out there, for looking at your photos that will take out certain bits of metadata, including dates and times and things like that might be important to you. I hope I'm not telling people who want to commit crimes things that they shouldn't know. In actual fact, it's all out there on the internet. If you can find this stuff out anyway. I'm not telling potential criminals anything they probably don't even know. But yeah, it is very, very worrisome, and I think my advice would be check first. Do it to them before they do it to you, I think is the thing.
Right, thank you. Right, so is the recovery of damaged or destroyed storage drives used in cases?
Yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah. Again, depending upon your lab, more sophisticated labs, obviously used by law enforcement and various others. Sorry, my dog's coming in and out. Stay still.
Hazards of working from home. Personally, or when the cats and the dogs make an appearance.
Yeah, I think they add a certain something to the live performance. Yeah, I mean, all sorts of damaged drives. For instance, I mean, I've known cases where, say, a boat has gone to the bottom of the sea, and somebody's gone down and got a hard drive off a computer that was there. A bit like when you get the black box out of it, from an aircraft, and it will be, it's all rusted to infinity. Seawater's terrible for that kind of thing. But there are specialist labs that can at least bring some of that data back. Obviously, they use very sophisticated techniques. I wouldn't do it. I don't have the equipment to do it. But there are very, very specialist places that can bring that stuff back. Likewise, CCTV. I've known cases where, a CCTV has been burned, so like all the again, it's usually on a hard disk inside a recorder, and for various, either the building's been torched or somebody's chucked something at it to make it all explode, hoping that'll all go away. But those things can be restored. At least parts of it can be restored, because what you've got to remember is there's a shed load of data on one of those drives. Even a 500 gigabyte drive, which you hardly ever see these days, has got stupid loads of data on it. So even if some of it gets destroyed, there's still going to be a lot of it that isn't destroyed. What was I going to say about that? Yeah. So, I mean, look at what we've got. You know, you've got the 1 terabyte, you've got a terabyte thumb drives these days. It's a frightening amount of data. So within that, yeah, there's, you know, 9 out of 10 there'll be something rescuable, and yes, certainly stuff that's rescued off digital devices is used in criminal cases. I do know that for certain, although I've not done it myself, I have to say.
Right, so there are a couple questions here about routes into digital forensics and degrees, or sorry, jobs once you get degrees and things like that. So I think that'd be a good question to end on. So I will jump to what are the other professional challenges and how are they approached to find solutions? For example, overcoming cloud storage and GDPR with social media providers.
I'm not quite sure I understand that question.
So I reckon, and Will, feel free to chip back in on the chat, that they're asking challenges such as overcoming cloud storage and GDPR issues. As an industry, how do you approach those to find solutions? Do you head straight to government to try to legislate it, or is it more along the lines of working with individual companies?
Well, as far as cloud data is concerned, it's a question of where is it? How long is it going to be there? Because quite often it's not stored for, you know, cloud data isn't stored for all that long. And can you get it back? Obviously, you have to have the proper legal permissions to do that. So if you're working with a corporate, they can give you legal permissions to access their cloud data, for instance, in a Google estate or something like that. But obviously, you have to have the proper legal permissions. You can't just sort of go zooming in there as though you're super person. None of us are above the law. So with the relevant permissions, you can access cloud data. There's particular software that you'd probably use, various packages that you would probably use to try and bring that in for analysis. Or you might even try and analyze it in situ. That's quite often done as well. But again, you'd be putting some software between you and it. And the idea being to try and keep it as forensically sound as possible. Pretty much things in the cloud, because it's changing all the time. You can't keep it absolutely pristine, but at least, as I said before, you've got to be able to explain what you did do and what might have happened as a result. So, I mean, there are challenges with the types of data that might be stored, and how can you analyze that properly? Is it in a format that you've got the appropriate software to be able to analyze it with? So I hope I'm answering the question here. I think I'm answering the question here. I'm trying to answer the question here. As for GDPR, it's like every other piece of legislation. It's the legislation. So you have to know the legislation and know what bits of the legislation are relevant to what you're doing professionally. And you better stick to stay within the legislation. If it says you can't do this and you can't do that, well, then you can't. Obviously, you've got things like information about people, names, addresses, ages, you know, sensitive data. In some instances, if it's employees and so forth within a company, if it's employee data, probably you're going to get the relevant permissions because the company has probably got all the right contracts signed with all the right people. But again, you have to ask, don't go steaming in there and expect that they really do have all that in place, because quite often small to medium enterprise haven't even thought about that sort of thing. So you could end up in could end up potentially in a huge amount of trouble. But I think that the basic answer to GDPR, and indeed any other type of legislation, is read and understand the regulations, read and understand how it impacts on your particular discipline, and on what you particularly need to do, what you need to access, and why you need to access it. And it's all down to, I hate to boringly keep repeating myself, but it's down to getting the relevant permissions.
Great. So we'll end with maybe you offering a bit of advice here. So we've had a few questions about the best routes into digital forensics. Does it rely on degrees? You know, what's a good pathway once you get in to study, and then once you get the degree, what are the career options?
Gosh, again, that's a really big one. I mean, my path was very different to what most people's would be. There are many, many more companies out there now that have digital forensic departments that deal with digital forensics. Some of the big, huge, great big accountancy firms, for instance, they have their own digital forensic departments and they do staff those up. Getting into it, gosh, you know, it's very difficult. It was very different when I came into it. And anyway, I set up my own company. So, and that was folks, because I happened to be a woman, and there are very few women in digital forensics, even fewer 20 years ago. So it was kind of difficult to try and get in anywhere. How to get in? Know people, I guess. That's like any job. It's having contacts. How to get the contacts? Well, I think put your brains to steep about what types of companies are likely to have a digital forensic capability. I know that most things are done online these days, and you know, so applying for jobs, who knows whether it actually goes through some system or some real person really reads it, or how far up the tree it really gets. I think obviously it's like everything else. The best way in anywhere is know somebody who knows somebody who can give you an introduction, I suppose. That's not very helpful for people who don't know anybody, who doesn't know anybody, to give them an introduction. I think that's all you can do, is look at the types of firms that are going to be looking for your type of capability. Or obviously there's law enforcement are looking for there's still quite a few authorities, and it's not just types of law enforcement. I'm just not thinking about the police in particular. You've got trading standards, for instance, people like that. They're doing digital forensics. So you might have to think outside the box a little bit, you know, so it's not necessarily just company X or Y or some police force or other. Quite a lot of the other agencies, you know, like what's it called? So the Home Office, for instance, they have their own digital forensic people. So I think it's looking around, and being on websites, you know, looking around the right websites. Basically, I was just trying to think. Forensic Focus is a good website to go and have a look at. You can get lots of. I'm just going to see if I can find it online. Yeah, it's literally forensicfocus.com, all one word, and that's quite a good place to go and have a snoop around. It's for digital forensics and e-discovery professionals, and you can join as a student, and you can probably get some very good advice. There's quite a lot of professionals on there. They're willing to give you the time and advice. I suggest that kind of thing. Start early, you know, start before you need a job. Start thinking what your strategies for getting a job, you know, where you might aim at will be. I mean, ostensibly, there should be lots of jobs in digital forensics, but I do know that they're pretty tough to get, and there's lots of people applying. So I'm sorry I can't be more useful than that, because there is no magic wand.
Yeah, well, the only thing I would add to that, because I think this is the same with any industry, especially as an OU student, talk to each other, talk to your tutors. Obviously, they are already in industry, and you know, you never know where a conversation could lead, and take advantage of networking, whether it be face-to-face or online events. OU students have a search for open university careers and employability services. They're always running different careers fairs, virtual internships, etc. So take advantage of all the resources that are available to you. So with that, it's come 1 o'clock now. And so on behalf of Jan, myself, and the OU, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we will see you again in September with more Ask the Expert sessions. Thanks,
everyone. Bye.